Hey guys, Cabin SNES Fever here. We are going to carry on with a video going through the NES library, the games that I beat for the UK library last year, and we're now on to the letter B. Let's get on with it. First up, we have Bad Dudes Dragon Ninja, a game that some people probably only know as Bad Dudes because that's what it was called in America. But over here we added the Dragon Ninja aspect to it. Which is kind of strange because the term ninja was so frowned upon with other aspects of the media, most famously being Ninja Turtles and the change to the word Hero Turtles. But alas, anyway, either way, here we have Bad Dudes Dragon Ninja, based on the Tecmo arcade beat 'em up. It's a pretty honest translation to NES. I mean, I think that I haven't actually played the arcade version, but from what I've read, this translates the levels fairly faithfully with the limitations that 8-bit hardware gives. But yeah, it does a good job. The kind of main premise of being able to play on two stages or two levels to each stage, being an upper level and a lower level that you can jump between, is still there. And to be honest, that allows for a huge amount of manipulation that you can do on enemies and the AI, because they don't really attack you when they're jumping. So if you're on like the upper part of the level and they're on the lower part and they jump between the two, you can kind of kick them while they're in the air. They won't hit you. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to manipulate the AI in this, which makes it quite an easy beat 'em up, I think. You do have a limited life count. There are limited continues, but with a bit of practice, I think I actually beat it, possibly my second playthrough. I can't remember if it was my first or my second, but it was, a couple of hours grind. Quite enjoyable, a lot easier once you have weapons. Some of the bosses are quite tough, but once you gain a weapon like a nunchuck or a knife, I think you can take them between levels as well. Yeah, once you've got that, it makes it a lot easier. I mean, it really makes the bosses very easy, actually, once you've got a weapon. So, quite a good game. Terrible audio soundbite of "I'm bad" at the end of each level in awful 8-bit, just absolutely just compressed to absolute hell. Sounds terrible. Sounds absolutely terrible. But yeah, not a bad beat up. It's no Double Dragon. Don't put it that way. But it's okay. It's a serviceable early beat 'em up. Next up, Balloon Fight. Probably one of the more sought after, slightly more rare of the launch titles. I think fairly warranted. I think Balloon Fight is just such a charming little game. Really like fun to play, quick to pick up the controls. You sort of control a guy with two balloons. It's an inertia based movement game. You can sort of flap your arms. Your arms essentially act as wings with your balloons attached to you. So you sort of flap around, you move up, you slowly drift down, you keep flapping to keep the movement. The idea is to pop your opponent's balloons and then they drop into the sea where they're eaten by a man-eating monster who can also eat you, so you've got to be careful when you go near the sea. Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of all there is to it. There is a second game mode, which is a sort of, I think they call it balloon trip, where you control your character and you're trying to navigate him through this field of electrical stars or lightning stars. I don't know what they are. Basically, just stars you don't want to touch because they'll kill you. And that's it. The balloon trip has an end as a physical endpoint. I suppose once you've got a certain way through it, your score goes down to 0 or 1. I think it is. Maybe it's 0 or 1. I can't remember. From then on, it just repeats. It doesn't go any lower, so you can kind of consider it beat at that point. And as for beating the main game, I think I'd have to check my notes, but I think it was something like phase 14, if I remember correctly. I'll have to check, but that's where the AI basically doesn't. That's where the game starts to loop. Essentially, the gameplay loops. There's no original levels after there, so that was my point to beat it. And yeah, it didn't take long. but it was a very charming game. Fantastic bit of music on there that's so iconic for the era of that game anyway. So great one. Okay. Maybe you can tell from the colour already. Here we have Barbie. I think a lot of people have a bit of a laugh at the idea of me sitting there playing Barbie. I mean, I do too. Like, obviously not a game I would have ever picked up had I not been trying to collect every game for the system. And it is what it is. It's Barbie. It's a game designed for girls. Well, you know, young girls at the time in the sort of 90s. Well, when did this come out? 91. Quite a sexist era anyway, probably for gaming. You know, I think it was predominantly seen as a boys thing, gaming. So I think there was probably an element from the designers of this game doesn't matter, it's for girls. They don't know what good games are, so who cares? And it's Barbie, so you know, whatever. We'll just put Barbie in it, and that'll be enough. And yeah, that definitely rings true to the experience of playing it. The aspects of what perhaps the designers thought girls playing this game would want are front and center. There's lots of outfit changes. There's some quite nice graphics of Barbie herself getting ready and you know, talking about going out and dressing up. The actual gameplay side of it is a bit of a mess. I mean, it's kind of platforming in its loosest form. It sums up the NES perfectly. You know, there's a lot of games like this where they've just taken a popular concept, something that they can try and spin to make a bit of money, and just made a game with the loosest possible terms around it. You know, I think, you know, you're fighting things like pizza ovens and ice cream machines, and I don't know, just garbage, absolute garbage game. Funnily enough, there are some kind of interesting mechanics in there. I think there's a level where you become a mermaid, and there are like some power-ups that you can get hold of. Some of Barbie's toys you can throw balls around. Barbie's good at sort of juggling balls and throwing balls around, and different balls that she throws gives different, you know, different things. Some of them are weapons, some of them interact with inanimate objects, and they then turn them to being her friends. Some of the animals you can interact with. You know, there is like stuff in the game that's quite creative, but it's just housed around this mess of terrible control and clunky platforming, and just generally a mess. So I don't think you're planning to buy it anyway, but if you are, I wouldn't advise it. Next up is another launch title, Baseball. Like we said about 10-Yard Fight, kind of surprised that this one kind of saw a release here again instead of something like Slalom, because baseball, another big American sport that wasn't big here in the 80s. I don't think it's still big here now, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, baseball was released here, and this is actually quite tough to beat, this one. As in terms of the early black box sport titles go, I'd say this is one of the harder ones. The control of it takes a bit of time to get used to. I think maybe someone who understands baseball a bit better than me might gel to it a bit quicker, but I found it quite difficult to sort of understand the different aspects of how to control offensive and defensive parts of the game. But and it is like, you know, once you get the hang of it, you can field and bat better. But I mean, I think the game I won, and there is only the one game, so if in terms of beating, all you have to do is just beat the computer in one game. It's obviously 9 innings, so it does take a bit of time. But I think the game I won, there were a lot of 0-0s throughout various innings. So I think I actually only really won it on the final innings, where I managed to get a couple of home runs. Yeah, anyway. Not perhaps, you know, a better game for someone who's more into baseball, but for me, it kind of fell on deaf ears, really. Batman. This is quite a famous title for the NES, and rightly so. Batman is a brilliant game. Sunsoft, who before I took on this challenge I was aware of as a developer, but I didn't quite give them the credit that they deserve, because they've got some cracking titles on the NES, some not so good ones too, but generally speaking a great software company who occasionally, well, more than occasionally, flawed for simple things like passwords, not including passwords, but on the whole, fantastic. This game, I can kind of understand not having a password. It's not as long as some of the others, which we'll get onto later. One of them's coming up quite soon. But yeah, I mean, in modern days now, you probably quite want a password to sort of carry on playing this one, I think. Overall, I think this is, I mean, what's nice about this game is it takes elements that have been successful in other series, namely Ninja Gaiden. The wall jump mechanic, it borrows and it kind of plagiarizes for this game, but it does it brilliantly. I think the atmosphere of this game, the look of it graphically, everything about this game just seems to work in harmony with the kind of classic comic, and the sort of darker aspects of that, which I think some of the later Batman games lost. This has it by the bucket load, and it's brilliant. And the difficulty is there, but it's not the hardest game. I think, for me, the thing that was the most difficult is the Joker. The final boss was, he was brutal. He was brutal, and it took many attempts to take him down. I'm sure that there are, foolproof approaches to beating the Joker, but to me it was something I hadn't done before, so I had to do it, just by playing, and it took me a long time, many continues, many attempts, and the final level was pretty tough, but we got there in the end, and I'm very happy to call that one beat, because it's quite a well-known title on the system, quite notorious. Okay, next up, Batman Return of the Joker, the sequel, again by Sunsoft. This is actually a lot rarer to get hold of. Quite a pricey title. I think this one's a bit of a shame, because I think that this game, possibly things like Contra 2 as well, this sort of sums up a difference. When did this come out? 91. So actually still quite early on, but I just feel like what this game dictates is Sunsoft taking criticism either from Nintendo or from the fan base about the first game being too difficult, and therefore just going completely the opposite way, because this game is just so easy in comparison to the first game that it really does let it down. I think there may even be passwords for this one as well, which, listen, I'm not slamming passwords. I think passwords are a great thing. I think passwords belong in every game, really, but if you're going to include a password, then you might as well make it as difficult or even more difficult than the last game, which didn't have them. Whereas this game, the gameplay is, the levels are way shorter, the gameplay is so much easier, it's completely lobotomized in comparison to the first. Bosses are easy, it looks nicer, there's some real nice sprite work going on, everything's bigger, bolder, brighter, but at the same time, that kind of graphical enhancement, I think, slightly suffers the kind of slightly darker tones that we came to appreciate from the first game. So, in my opinion, I think it's a bit of a letdown. I don't really have a desire to want to play it really again now, whereas the first one, despite giving me, absolute hell to beat the Joker, I'd happily sit down and play the first one again now. So that's my opinion on that. Okay, here's a great one. Battle of Olympus. I think if you took two aspects of gaming, RPG and adventure, and then you combined it with kind of Greek mythology, I mean, you are on to an absolute winner with me, because I, as a kid, absolutely loved Greek mythology. And I never actually had this as a kid. I would have loved this game as a kid, because it's essentially a reskinned version of Zelda 2. And Zelda 2 is my favourite Zelda. Not just my favourite, NES RPG. It's my favourite Zelda, through and through. So to see a reskinned Zelda 2 set in a kind of Greek mythological environment is just like heaven to me as a kid. But I didn't have it. I came to it when I was in my teens. A friend of mine lent me his NES, and yeah, this is one of the games that was included, and yeah, I fell in love with it. I played it back then with no walkthrough and beat it, and I did the same again this time round, probably 10 years later. It's it's the kind of RPG that if you put the time in, and you kind of, once you get the hang of what you're doing, if you listen to people and you talk to people, you are told what you need to do. It's not like in any way the most confusing RPG out there. Of course, there are limitations that text bubbles from 8-bit games can give you, and therefore there is a small leap of faith that has to go with, and a small trial and error aspect that has to go with the gameplay. But it's nothing on the level of some games that have preceded it and followed it, actually. And if and also with these adventure RPGs, I mean, that's part of the fun. I mean, using a walkthrough, well, I mean, where's the adventure? You're just doing someone else's game, So for me, this is almost like the perfect example of early adventure and gameplay kind of balancing together. And it's tough, yeah. I mean, it's like Zelda 2. It's got that hard side-scrolling platforming elements to it, but yeah, you can level yourself up and you can get better, and yeah, I just love it. Great game. Features lots of the famous Greek mythological bosses that as a kid I would have just loved to have played. Right, next up, Battleships. You're thinking to yourself, how can you make a game of Battleships? What does that entail? Well, it entails essentially nothing more than just playing Battleships on the on a board game. It is just a board game in 8-bit. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember exactly how many stages there are. Far too many. Maybe 40 or even 50 stages to beat. They're very long, very dull. They've added in some serviceable graphics for the time to go with when you're actually shooting ships, but essentially, other than that, it is literally a board, and you with a graph on it, and you pick your square, and it's either hit or miss. The small advancements they added was additional ships as the game goes on. I think you get like an aircraft carrier with which has, what does that have? I can't remember. Different kinds of weapons. Basically, different ships they've included have different weapon payloads, which allow you to kind of hit multiple squares at once, which kind of adds a new layer to it, definitely. And some of them have things like helicopter support and sonar from submarines, but it sounds more adventurous than it really is. It's literally Battleships on a board game, and far too many long stages. And the worst thing of all is that they made the submarine 1 square wide. Now, I don't know about you, but on the original board, the submarine was 3 squares wide. 2 squares would have been okay, but to make it 1 square, do you know how long it takes? Do you know how long that makes a game? If you're both searching for the flipping submarine, it can just go on forever. Like, it's so tediously dull, and it just becomes a complete game of luck. As if there wasn't enough luck in Battleships anyway. Try looking for a 1 square ship, and do that 40 times. It's not fun. All right. Probably doesn't need any introduction. Battletoads is often cited as the hardest game on the NES. Having beaten it, I don't think that's true, but I did give it a 10 out of 10. I felt like there was a slight element of doing that on a kind of honorary level, because but that's not to say that it's not a hard game. It is a very, very hard game, but I think that it's one of those games that if you practice it enough, you get good at it enough to just beat it consistently, which isn't always the case with most of the other games that I gave a 10 out of 10 for. You know, a lot of the others, it's like, you know, they're just hard for hard's sake, and it may be a control thing or just a general difficulty that you won't necessarily be able to replicate it. With Battletoads, I feel like, as was proven when I did it live for the stream on the final day, I practiced it all week, and I had made it to the final, to the Queen, I think twice during my practices, and that was when I said, right, I'm just going to turn it off now, and I didn't even beat the Queen when I got there, which was like quite a hard thing to do, to turn the system off when you're at the final boss. But I really wanted to do it live. I wanted that reaction, and yeah, it was great. It was great to do it. But I did it on the first time when I did the live stream. It took about an hour and a half to beat the game, but yeah, I didn't have to restart the game, and that's what I'm saying. Like practicing it, you can get to the point where you can beat it fairly consistently. And that's that's not to say that it's not a hard. I'm not trying to say that it's not a good game because you can beat it easily. If anything, it's a real testament to how good the game is, because it's really, really hard, but for all the right reasons. And that's frankly what good games should be about. Difficulty should come from a game being good because it's challenging for the right reasons, not because it's let down by terrible control or unfair mechanics. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's a brilliant platformer. It's got lots of it's essentially a beat 'em up platformer racer. It juggles different genres. It does them all really well. It has some really, really, really hard stuff to it, but you practice, you get good at it, and it's very, very rewarding game to finally beat. So yeah, Battletoads. Right, next up, Battletoads Double Dragon. Now this is one I beat early on in the challenge, and it's one that I hadn't ever really played. I had played Battletoads before. I was aware of Battletoads. I think Battletoads has a lot of publicity. Battletoads Double Dragon doesn't have anything like as much publicity surrounding it, but it's such a good game. I had this idea that it was a bit of a bad game for some reason. I don't know why, but I kind of remember maybe reading something about it being quite buggy and not playing that well. But that's just nonsense. This is a brilliant game. Again, like Battletoads, it balances different genres. There's a shooter stage. Again, it's essentially a beat 'em up, but you've got shooter stage, platforming stuff, racing aspects to it. But I mean, this just showboats everything that the NES can do. And it's a late release. I assume it's 93, yeah. 93, but the stuff that this game shows the NES and showing what the NES can do is incredible. It also came out on Super Nintendo, which I think is probably arguably the slightly better version to play. I don't know, but I mean, you're definitely not going to go wrong picking up this one if you can find it at a reasonable price, and you don't have the SNES one. I mean, hell, just get this, because it's a fucking great play. And yeah, again, very, very difficult. Took a lot of playthroughs to beat that one. That was one I beat quite early on in the challenge, and it was a lot of fun beating it. A lot of good guys watching that one live when we beat that. It was a real atmosphere in the stream, and it was good fun. Okay, oh hold on, that's I think I've jumped ahead there. Yeah. Next up is probably another well-known classic, Bionic Commando, one of Capcom's action titles. I mean, again, another standout title on the NES, most commonly known for the fact that it's a platformer without an ability to jump. Instead of jump, you have a bionic arm with a harpoon that you can shoot into, or a grappling hook, should I say, that you can shoot into things and then swing across chasms. It takes a long time to get used to, and even late on in the game, having played it for many hours, I would still find myself absentmindedly expecting to jump when I pressed B or A, sorry, but yeah, it doesn't happen, and you just have to get used to the bionic arm. It does control very nicely. It's a bit like some of the other games I've mentioned, like Adventure Island or things like that. It has an unnecessarily complicated way of continuing, and where you have to basically farm. You can farm continues from certain bonus stages, but you have to actually get to those bonus stages in the first place. And there's a lot of leveling up you can do, which to really make the game beatable, you need to sit there and spend a bit of time just kind of shooting enemies to grind bullets that give you levels up eventually. So yeah, there's a bit of bullshit to it in that aspect to it. The fact that there's no password, no continue, is probably the biggest nail in the coffin for, I think, many gamers who'd want to play it today, because it's a very long game. This took me, I didn't even know I was playing it all night. I think I left it overnight on pause, carried it on the next day in the evening. It was a good sort of 6 7 hour type investment. So I think it's an unrealistic game for many people to beat nowadays without like a walkthrough or something like that. But yeah, it's a shame because it's rewarding. It's a good one. Very good game. Okay, next up, Blades of Steel. I guess we've got to carry on with the American sport franchises that we've already spoken of. We've had American football, we've had baseball, now it's ice hockey. This time it's Konami rather than Nintendo, and it shows. I mean, this is a great ice hockey game on the early systems. I mean, it's obviously been surpassed by probably, we're talking about EA's NHL series, but for 8-bit and even for something today, like, this is still an enjoyable game to play. It controls pretty nicely. It's a bit limited in what you can do, but it's ice hockey. You can skate around, you can tackle people, you can check people, you got your face-offs, you've got fighting that you can do, you got penalties. Like, it's got most of the aspects of ice hockey that you'd come to expect. You've got different competition modes that you can enter, like college, professional, and like maybe amateur. Was it like college, semi-professional, professional? Different cups to win. Yeah, not the hardest game to beat by any stretch, but enjoyable. And yet again, Konami proving what a force they are in gaming. Okay, yet another classic, Blaster Master, and again we're back to Sunsoft. And I mentioned before about games coming up in a minute. This is the one that most notoriously just is so badly suffers from not having a password. I have heard that people at Sunsoft just didn't know how to do passwords. They just didn't know how to program them successfully for games like this. Games that have, this is an adventure RPG. It has a lot of items that can be found, and I guess they just didn't know how to do a password that would work successfully for a game that has that many collector pieces. And it's a shame because it renders the game basically impossible for anyone to beat who's not a seasoned pro or just an absolute masochistic kind of obsessive person like me, who was going to just commit 2-3 days of 4, 5, 6 hour playthroughs to beat it, because that was the only way you're going to do this game. And even then I had to reference walkthrough, I think, on a couple of things, because I just had no idea, and I didn't like doing that for the challenge. But I think this is one of the games where I had to a couple of times look at things. But those are the criticisms of it. They're well known. The positives are that this is just so good. It's just such a good, an original adventure RPG game that has just so much. Well, it's not even RPG. It's like an adventure action game, and it has so much fun. I mean, it's Metroid before Metroid, essentially, or at least Metroid before Super Metroid. It takes, if anything, it's taken the original Metroid and done what many people who have played Super Metroid wished Metroid was on the NES. This is Metroid on the NES, in my opinion. I do like Metroid, but this is the complete kind of experience, except it doesn't have a password. But yeah, just so good. So many fun aspects to it. Difficult, definitely. the other thing about it that really hampers it, and this was the bit that was unnecessary from Sunsoft, is the fact that you don't give us a password, but then you also give limited continues and lives. And this is that damn long game. I mean, you could be looking at, you know, even if you knew what you're doing, you're looking at like 4 hours, or you know, maybe 2 to 4 hours, depending on your skill level, to actually beat the game. That's a lot of commitment to potentially lose it all. You know, after sort of failing to, you know, after a game over. So wow, does it put pressure on the final boss fight? Oh my god. It does. But yeah, we did it, and very happy to have beaten that one, because that was one I put a lot of time into before and had never had success in beating it, so it was a great feeling to beat that. Okay, Boulder Dash. This is another of the really hard games that I had to beat. I like my puzzle games. You know, I don't know. I kind of, when I started playing this, I really got quite excited about it. You know, it's single level puzzles. You've got an overworld map. You go between levels, and you know, in each stage, you're going around and trying to basically get to treasure, whilst by kind of removing earth underneath. But the boulders can collapse and can crush you. That's kind of the biggest aspect of it. There's lots of other enemies, insects and things like that along the way that can kill you, and traps. But generally, probably your biggest risk is the whole level collapsing around you. And it's actually done really quite well. The way that the level sort of collapses and cascades down as you remove ground from underneath it is difficult to sort of anticipate. Even once you've been playing it for a long time, it is very hard to just look at the screen above you and say to yourself, well, you know, if I remove this piece of earth, you know, that diamond's going to fall to there, and then that piece is going to go there, and that's going to, you know, it just goes on and on and on and on. And also, you have quite difficult time limits to work with, so you don't really have a lot of time to just sit there and kind of calculate everything. I can't remember if this is one of the games that allows you to pause and still see the playfield, because a lot of puzzle games don't let you do that. Once you pause, it just kind of removes the screen. I can't quite remember, but either way, it's very difficult, and what makes it just so hard, so unnecessarily hard, and this is what I was going back to when I was talking about Adventures of Lolo, is the lack of a password for every level. It's just not necessary. You know, you're playing a puzzle game, just give me a password for every level, okay? This game, you know, I think it divides it into little islands or little sections. There's often 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 levels that you have to do, or maybe it's just 4, I can't remember. But there are certainly at least 4 levels at times that you're having to beat successively before you get a password. And if you lose your lives, you get your game over, you're back to the first one again, and they're not easy, you know, like even once you know what you're doing, like it's not just a case of, you know, repeating everything exactly the same way and you'll be absolutely fine. Enemies are moving all the time on the board, so you know, if you're not doing the level at exactly the same speed that you did at the first time, an enemy's going to be in a different place than it was last time. And you know, things may even fall differently. I'm not even 100% sure. So there is a huge challenge in this game that's unnecessary. It's very, very long. There's like 3 worlds or something you have to do, or three worlds each with various islands. Yeah, horribly difficult game. And it's a shame, because it's really, really fun. It's a really fun game, but it's just made so brutally difficult by that. Yeah, that password feature. Bobble, got to be one of the most famous action puzzle games of the era. Tato's arcade classic, brought to the NES by Tato as well. Ocean were responsible for publishing a lot of of Tato's library, including the rest of the Bubble series here. But this one saw production, I think, pretty much by Tato. I don't know if it is by anyone else. And it's great. I mean, this is a fantastic port to the NES. 100 levels, just like the arcade. If you beat it in single player, you get the bad ending. If you beat it in 2-player, you get the good ending. But essentially, yeah, shoot bubbles, trap enemies in bubbles, pop them, pop all the enemies whilst they're in bubble form, and move on to the next level. Lots of fun power-ups. Well, actually, no, power-ups, probably not that many fun power-ups. There are some extra power-ups. You've got, you know, your speed boots, which I call the death boots, because it's so hard to actually control bubble jumping when you've got them on. But there are other power-ups, but there are lots of just fun, neat things in this that, you know, like that run through it. It's so charming. It's such a charming game, and yeah, I mean, one continuous piece of music that will drive you insane, but is also so lovable, just like the gameplay. Just lovable, great, fantastic. And also, you know, quite difficult. I always think it's going to be easy playing Bubble Bobble, because I've beaten it before. I'd beaten it before I did this challenge as well. But yeah, it always shocks me about how difficult it gets later on to do some of the bubble jumping things. Right, Bucky up here. Konami again, coming back with a late, this is 93 I assume, or possibly 94, doesn't even say. 91, really? I think that's the copyright for the actual cartoon. I think this is definitely a late release. Anyway, there's definitely a late release for the system, and this is a late release that sums up what is so good about a late release, because many late releases are just crap, just thrown together to kind of quickly sell something when there's a 16-bit version somewhere else. But this is a late release where it's like they have pushed the hardware to the limit, and they've really got everything they can possibly squeeze out the NES, and it's there. It looks fantastic, nice big sprites, great gameplay, various characters to unlock. All of them offer different mechanics and ways of playing. Lots of levels. I think there's passwords for every level, so, you know, again, it's quite a casual play. It gets quite difficult at the end, but then I think it lets you continue indefinitely from pretty much every screen, nearly. Certainly nearly every screen. You don't even have to start from the beginning of a level. You can just kind of start from the screens that you're on, which, yeah, I mean, it makes it very beatable. Something I think most gamers should, if you want to challenge yourself to beating an NES game that feels quite rewarding to beat, but also is fun to play, this is a good one. Very rare, expensive cartridge, so, you know, probably play it on emulator, but yeah, great fun, excellent game. Okay, Bugs Bunny's Birthday Blowout. Yeah, I mean, this is the game that when I was a kid, I played it and I loved it because it had Bugs Bunny in it. It had all the characters and everyone was there. I think Taz is there, and Daffy, Tweety Pie, and everyone's there, but yeah, it's just not a good game. It's just a bad game from Kemco. It looks nice. The characters look nice. As I said, they're all there, but it's just so stupidly easy and quite buggy. Like the animations of Bugs is poor. It's like missing frames on his animation. It's quite jerky. But yeah, like the fact that you basically gain about 10 extra lives for every level. I mean, by the end, I mean, it's so long as well. I think there's like about 8 worlds. There may be warps. I didn't find any myself, so I had to do all the levels myself. By the end, I mean, I was almost asleep playing it with a life count of about 90. So yeah, not very rewarding experience. Definitely a grind to finish, and yeah, not a great title. Speaking of great titles, though, Blue Shadow, here's a great title. Taito again. I mean, you just can't go wrong with Taito, really, generally speaking. This is Taito's answer to Ninja Gaiden, on NES anyway. I mean, I'm sure being Taito, it's probably an arcade original. But it was Blue Shadow was the European title. What was it called? Art of the Ninja, something like that. Shadow of the Ninja. That was the NTSC title, which is what it's probably better known as. But yeah, futuristic kind of ninja Ninja Gaiden Shinobi-esque platform fighter. Some nice weapons in there and just good gameplay and tight response, control. Everything's neat and nice. Difficulty's not too bad. Like, it's quite average really for NES. Kind of a difficult final stage, but the boss fight at the end is a bit of a nightmare. But once you get the pattern down, it's quite easy. I think I had to game over on the final boss the first playthrough that I got there, and I think I beat it on the next one. But yeah, this is a great game. I mean, Ninja Gaiden probably is a better game, but this is a great original sort of second option to something like Ninja Gaiden. So definitely recommend that one. Another lesser known of title that I highly recommend is Bret Fighter. This is another shooter. It's an action shooter where you, a bit like Action New York or SCAT as it's known, you're controlling a floating guy moving around with a jetpack, whatever. It's an 8-way directional shooter, 8-way, which for NES is like pretty original. And what's neat is that you can lock in your direction of fire and still move separately, which I thought was really cool. A bit like, again, with Action New York, similar thing. It's the kind of neat control that makes like a good shooter on this kind of platform, and it works well. It's quite difficult, the stages, but you get a password on each level. The difficulty really peaks for the final level, at least for me. I struggled a lot. I kept on getting to the final boss. I must have got to the final, I think I did him like 4, 5, 6 times, I don't know. And just kept on dying, having to go back 2 stages because I couldn't power up my weapons enough in the final stage to take on the final boss. I had to start from the stage before to give me enough time to power up enough and then essentially not die for the whole time to make it there. So yeah, I found that quite challenging. And then when I beat it, I realised I'd only beaten it on the kind of easy setting. Once you've beaten that, there are other settings you can choose, but one was enough for me. With the NES, I don't have any strict policies about beating, different modes. I'm just about beat whatever mode you start on. Right, I think, yeah, that's it. That's everything from B. So we'll be back for another video to talk about the letter C. And it feels like Sesame Street now, but yeah, we're about to talk about the letter C next time. So I hope you enjoyed, and let me know what you think of these videos and if you're enjoying them, and if there's anything else you want to see. See you later.